This video is going to look at the difference between void versus non-void functions. I'm going to start to look at a void function, which is exactly the one we created previously, that prints out a bunch of characters on a line. That's handy because we can use it to print titles whenever we need. It doesn't do any calculations, so it doesn't actually have to return a value. So we say its return value is void, and then we don't need to return a value at the end of the function. I'm going to compare this to another function, which I'm going to call power. Now, natively, they don't have a function in C to calculate n to the power of 3 or 4 or whatever. So I'm going to define a little function that does it. And internally it declares I, and it sets result to be 1. It takes two parameters, an n, which is the number it's going to put to a power, and pow, which is the power it's going to put it to. It goes through a for loop, and it multiplies the result by n pow times, which is equivalent to putting the number to a power. So 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3. 3 multiplied by itself 3 times, and that's exactly what this will do. At the end, it returns the result that it calculated in there. You don't have to call it result. I just call it result because it's easy to track what I'm going to return. It's always the result. And this says that it's going to return an int, and in fact, the type it returns is an int, and it has to be an int. Now we'll see how we use these in main. There's print cars, and I use it by using its name and passing the parameters. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to print a table of the powers of 2 from 0 up to 10. So I drive it through a for loop where I equals 0, I is less than 11, I plus plus, and every time I print out I, which is the number I'm going to put to the power, it's the number of times I'm going to put 2 to some power. So 2 to the 0th, 2 to the 1st, 2 to the 2nd, 2 to the 3rd. And I'm going to call the power function, and I'm going to pass 2 as the number I want to put to a power, and I as the power I want to put it to. Now, if you look at the format code, it says it's %6d, which means it's going to print a decimal in a field 6 wide. And it'll be right justified in that field. So rather than supplying a value, I supply a function, but because that function returns a value, it uses the return value of that function. So we can use a function that returns a value any place we can use a variable or a constant value. So that's one of the really nice things about functions which return a value. We can just use them whenever we want their value, and it gets substituted into an expression just like we typed a number or we typed a variable name. Now I'm going to run it to show you what it does, and I get my row of dashes, my row of stars at the end. In here I printed titles and numbers, and then 2 to the power of n with 2 stars means to the power of, and it's 2 squared is 4, 2 to the 3 is 8, 2 to the 4 is 16, and eventually we get up to 2 to the 10 being 1024. Notice how everything is lined up. And the way I did that was because I specified the same field width for everything. So I just want to look briefly at how I did that in the title. Here I said %4d and %6d, which is to print a decimal in 4 spaces and in 6 spaces. Up in the title I said print %4s and %6s, which is to print a string in 4 spaces and then a string in 6 spaces. The first string is quote and quote, and the second one is quote 2 star star and quote, and it lines everything up nicely. So that's a nice way to line up tables quickly. The other thing is, because this is in a for loop, I actually call this function 11 times. And I do the same calculation 11 times right there without having to write the code again. And that's one of the nice things about being able to use functions. So that's the difference between a function which returns an explicit value and a function which returns nothing, and in this case void.